Alright friends, if you were watching the earlier video, I just strapped it to start over because, yeah, we run a food closet at High Point Church. I'm actually here at my office in High Point right now. I did have one appointment today, and she was a couple of hours late, and I thought it was a no-show anyway, and luckily I had a friend here with me to let me know that person was here, and that sort of thing is pretty important. It's an important part of what we do at High Point, so I just wanted to go ahead and explain that. So like I said, we're just going to start over with Chapter 32. I don't know how long the last video was, maybe 15 minutes or so, so if you already watched that, then once this video is done, maybe just move your cursor to about 15 minutes in, and you should find where we're at. Alright. Chapter 32. Alva Dene for Hurin. It was half an hour before dawn when Alva and Hope walked out of their tent to join the army. Dachmon had not attacked in the night. Prince Matarin knew that the Lassanians had gained new hope from the wedding, and he did not want to lose extra men by attacking when the Lassanians were full of vigor. Plus, waiting for the daylight would show them just how hopelessly they were outnumbered. Men had been filing through the pass the entire night. To the east, north, and south there were enemy soldiers as far as the eye could see. On the west side, the mouth of the pass was packed with men. Thousands upon thousands had entered the valley. Matarin's plan was to crush them from all sides. He had been patient, and now was the time to close his checkmate. Matarin's forces were a combination of Dachmonian and Hurin men. They were set in alternating divisions of 500. 500 Dachmonian soldiers, then 500 Hurin. Dachmonian captains led each division. Having the men divided thus kept there from being too strong a concentration of Hurin men, so that any who became confused in their loyalties could be dealt with swiftly. As first light crept into the sky, Alva and Hope seemed oblivious to the forces surrounding them. They had that newlywed glow which puts lovers on the top of the world, and Hope's aura affected the entire Lassanian army, so they felt happy and confident. All but the night watchmen had gotten a good night's sleep, and they were fresh and ready. Lassania would use no cavalry this morning. All soldiers were on foot. Their ranks were formed in a giant circle pointing outward with 4 points of command. Bonson commanded the east point, facing the greater valley. Sverian was at his side. Pensor and Glander commanded the west point, facing the past. Hellel and Jagrok commanded the south point, and Prior and Dieron commanded the north. The soldiers from Lassa Creston had split into 2 companies. One stood at the east with Bonson, and the other on the west with Pensor. Though he had never been in a battle, Philon IV stood with Hellel. Hellel objected, but Philon reasoned that, should the army be slaughtered, he would die anyway. There was everything to gain from joining the fight, and nothing to gain from cringing in the center. As promised the night before, Alva would join Bonson. Hope would return to the platform at the center of the camp where the wedding had been performed. Nira and Salia were there waiting for her. Once there, she would raise her hands to the sky and revel in the joys of being a new bride. As Alva and Hope were about to part ways, he kissed her goodbye. As he pulled his head back, he saw a happy, knowing look in her eye. "What is it?" he asked. "I'll tell you after," she said. "Then I guess we better hurry," he replied. As Alva neared Bonson, the latter looked like he had something on his mind. Alva gave him an inquiring look. "May I address the... Pardon me. May I make an address before you give the command to attack?" Bonson asked. "Of course." As the sky grew lighter, it became clearer and clearer how thoroughly the Lassanians were outnumbered. The men still felt the power of Hope's glow. Mataran's tactic was beginning to work. They could not help losing heart when they saw such impossibly superior numbers. When the first line of the sun appeared on the eastern horizon, Bon Son stepped out from the line about 10 paces. Rather than turning to face his own army, he remained facing the enemy. Speaking loudly so that the words echoed for all to hear, he gave the following address. Soldiers of Huron, I am Lord Bon Son, son of Lord Ben-El, descendant of the Strong Arm, Sword Master General of the Lassanian Army, and servant of Alva Denay. I am a Huron, and I serve Alva Denay because I fight for Huron. I know you all felt the power of Lady Hope last night. Compare that with the dark power that drives you. Bon Son paused for a long moment, then continued. I know that you fight us because they have threatened to torture and murder your wives, children, and parents if you do not. I will not deceive you. They will do what they say. But consider this. If Dachmon prevails, then their entire lives will become long, drawn-out torture and misery. The only way to truly stop their pain is to stand with Alva Denay now. Should any of your family members survive until we can purge Dachmon from our land, Lady Hope can heal our pain. She can heal the land itself. Soldiers of Huron, embrace Alva Denay as your general. When he gives the command to attack, turn to your right and your left and fight with us to destroy the forces of darkness and restore the light to the twin kingdoms. Mataran did not do anything to interrupt Bon Son's speech. He had planned to give the Lassanians plenty of time to stare at his troops, and he never imagined that Bon Son could say anything that would thwart his plans for the day. He was also curious what the young man had to say. There was silence following Bon Son's speech until someone in the Huron ranks of Mataran's army shouted, Alva Denay for Huron! At that moment, Alva signaled the attack. As the Lassanian army rushed forward, all the Huron divisions on the enemy side turned on their Dachmonian counterparts, all shouting, Alva Denay for Huron! As Hope's wedding glow neutralized the power of the Dachmonim, the Dachmonian forces began to be routed and slaughtered by the Lassanians from the front and the Hurons from the sides. Several great cracks were heard as Mataran sent forth waves of dark power the way he had done 2 days earlier, but on this day they were no match for the pure, sweet glow of the young bride. Seeing his error, Mataran gathered as many Dachmonim as possible and retreated into the pass. The Dachmonim were on the far side and unable to join their master, so they kept charge of the Dachmonian forces and tried to mount a defense. But the surprise of the Huron soldiers turning and attacking them en masse was too great to counter. Alva made a point of finding the Dachmonim on the battlefield and slaying them one by one. Bon Son was the first besides Alva to reach one of the Dark Warriors. Knowing from the dry lake that it might mean his life, he hacked him in half with a mighty swing. Bon Son felt a tingling in his hands, but nothing more. Hope's glow that had once brought Alva back from the dead was now powerful enough to protect the entire army. Mataran could see that the battle could not be won, and that he needed to ensure that the war was not lost in one day. He began pulling his forces toward the center pass, where he would set up strong defenses with only Dachmonian soldiers. The army on the other side of the Camden Mountains was still much larger than Alva's forces, even with their new additions, but more than half of it was composed of Huron soldiers. How could he keep them from turning to fight for Alva Denay? This was a question that would need attention, but he had more pressing issues at the moment. The day's battle was not long. The day's battle was long, but not as long as it might have been. With Matarin retreating and the number of Dahmanim waning, the Dahmonian soldiers soon surrendered. Thousands of prisoners were taken. It was about 4 o'clock when proper arrangements for the prisoners had finally been made. As soon as he could, Alva made his way to Hope. She was smiling amorously as he approached her, still standing on her platform with Nera and Salia. "What is it you are going to tell me?" Alva asked. "You're going to have a son," Hope replied. Alva was overwhelmed. For some time he was speechless, but very happy. "You already know it's going to be a son?" he asked. "Mm-hmm." It was pointless to ask how she could know that she was with child, or how she could know his gender. This was Hope. That answered all those questions. He rushed to her, picked her up, and swung her around and kissed her. "You know what else?" she asked merrily. "There's more?" "Sort of. He helped you win today." "The first victory of Al-Salah Dene the 28th, Alva said. "I wish his grandfather could be here. I wish both of his grandfathers could be here." Chapter 33. Stalemate. The night after the battle, most of the army took their rest. The following night there would be a great feast commemorating their victory. At this feast, King Philon gave many rewards for valor, followed by cheers and shouts. The generals all insisted on receiving no rewards, wanting this night to be for the men. Among those most honored were Glandair, Sverian, and Hendren II. At the end of the celebration, Philon announced that he would give the final award. The award of greatest honor came at the end of the night, so the crowd was hushed. Philon called forth Hendren the healer. Hendren was very embarrassed as he walked forward. He had not wanted to leave the tent of healing, but his presence at the feast was commanded, and the wounded were healing quickly because Hope had been spending much time with them. The feast had had a head table at which the generals were seated. As the honors were given, Philon had risen and taken a place in front of the table, insisting that Alva stand by his side. As Hendren came forward, Alva nodded and smiled. Hendren nodded back, awkwardly. "Is this man a friend of yours?" Philon asked. "He's from my home village, Your Majesty." "That must be quite a village if its warriors are like you and its healers are like this." "Lord Dene's father made it a great village, Your Majesty," blurted out Hendren. Then he looked nervous for speaking out of turn, but Philon smiled and set him at his ease. "My father also learned a lot in the village," Alva said. "Hendren's father taught him a lot about healing." "Al-Salah Dene learned the healing arts?" Philon asked. "He learned everything he thought would be useful," Alva explained. "He already knew a lot already," Hendren said. "He even taught my father some things." "Fascinating," Philon said. Then he faced the crowd, feeling this private conversation was going on too long. "At our darkest moment," he began, "when the Dahmanim set our entire camp into terror, only 3 people remained standing. One, of course, was Lady Hope the Luminary. The second was our great Alva Dene, but the third was Hendren the Healer. Hendren, who stood to help men under his care and faced a fiery inferno to save their lives." "It wasn't courage," Hendren blurted out. "I was terrified, but a healer must care for the hurting at all times." At that moment, Bonson stood behind the table, drew his sword, and held it up, saying, "Hendren for the Twin Kingdoms." greater than all the warriors save one. Alva stood, raised his own sword, and said, greater than all save none. Hellel then stood, raising his own sword, and said, Hendren, who teaches us that compassion is a greater power even than courage. Svarian was standing by Glandair near the front of the crowd. He whispered to his friend, that seems a little much, don't you think? He wasn't at the front like we were. A month ago I'd have agreed, Glandair said, but I'm learning. He then raised his own sword and shouted, Hendren for Lassania! Svarian pondered Glandair's words for a moment, then raised his own sword and in a booming voice shouted, Hendren for Achnan! Kindness over power! The crowd began to chant, Hendren, Hendren, Hendren. Hendren's face was red. After a time, Philon raised his hand for the crowd to be silent. He then said to Hendren, You are our most honored man tonight. What reward would you have? Well, Hendren said slowly, I'd really appreciate it if everyone could stop shouting my name. And when the war is good and over, I really want to go back home so my wife doesn't have to keep doing all the healing work. Philon smiled. He looked at Alva with an amused yet impressed expression. So I can reward you by letting you go back to what you were doing before. Yes, Your Majesty. I'm not here for rewards. I'm here because I believe in Lord Alva and Lady Hope. My only wish is to go home. Well, I'm afraid you'll have to forgive an eccentric king who sends you home a wealthier man, Philon said. I'm sorry to have kept you from your men, but I'm sure they will forgive you. After the feast, there was much organizing and training to assimilate the great Huron forces into the Lassanian army. Many brave Huron soldiers had been honored at the feast, and now that they were fighting against Dachmon rather than for it, they brought a new energy to the tired Lassanian troops. Meanwhile, Matarin had set up fortifications at the center pass that would be difficult to break as as difficult to break as Alcela-Denez had been for Diaphon the Conqueror. Let me stop for a minute. I want to reread that paragraph. Something went a little wrong. All right. Meanwhile, Matarin had set up fortifications at the center pass that would be as difficult to break as Alcela-Denez had been for Diaphon the Conqueror. Alva had no intention of wasting that many men on the venture. He did not have the men to spare. This put the two armies at a stalemate. Various operations were being carried out, making it clear that Alva had a plan, but it was also clear that it was a secret one. He did not want his strategy to leak to Matarin. This gave the army the difficult and monotonous task of waiting, though the waiting involved constant training and military exercise. The monotony was broken for a time by the marriage of Bonson and Salia. Alva and Hope's wedding, important though it was, had been simple and quick, with no festivities. Because things were now in a much better place, the second wedding was a huge event. Most of the city of Bracia traveled out to the military camp to join the celebration. The wedding was in the morning and was followed by a whole day of feasting, celebration, and dancing. Bonson had more men to stand with him than Alva. In addition to Alva and Prior was Kiel, Diron, and Svarian. This was a great honor for Svarian because it was rare for a commoner to stand with a lord at his wedding. Of course, it was even more rare for a lord to marry a commoner, so that was the greater subject for people to talk about. That Bonson had 5 men meant that Salia needed 3 more women than Hope and Nera. For these she chose 3 close friends from Bracia who came for the occasion. Sal was there, of course, in the seat of honor for the bride's father. Bonson's father was somewhere in Huron, so Hellel again took the place of a father. He was the closest thing to a father Bonson had present. Bonson was finely dressed for the wedding. He wore a suit of white that fit tightly around his upper body and showed off his magnificent physique. Salia wore a simple yet elegant white dress and looked very pretty. It was quite ironic that Hope should be one of the ladies that stood with her. Hope did her best not to glow, but she was so happy for them that this was difficult. Looking more beautiful than ever, while 5 months with child, most eyes were on her rather than the bride. But that did not matter, because Bonson had eyes only for Salia, and she was too busy staring back at him to notice where anyone else was looking. After the wedding, Alva asked Bonson if he still needed to know why they had waited till dawn to attack. Bonson said he thought he might be able to figure it out. Hope and Pryor sang a duet of a long, beautiful song they had written for the occasion. It chronicled Bonson's great accomplishments in one verse and Salia's life in Bracia in the next. Salia had always thought her life dull and pointless, but the song made it seem beautiful and important. The final verse told the story of how they met and fell in love, though it left out any reference to Alva or Hope. When they were done, the minstrels from Grenvere performed for some time. The tall lady Pryor had once noticed at Philon's banquet for the lords was there, and after the minstrels had finished playing and singing, he made a point of making her acquaintance. Bonson and Salia's wedding took place 5 months after the battle. They had not wanted to wait so long, but Sal had insisted they wait a while to make sure they would not change their minds. He had some doubts about the constancy of the young man, and had wanted them to wait a whole season change. They compromised on roughly half that time. After the wedding, things went back to their routine. Matarin seemed content to let his army hold the center pass, but Alva knew that he was biding his time while he thought of a new way to attack. He had seen to it that there were 5 military bases at key points in the pass as one traveled toward the center. The furthest up was close enough to the great rock gateway of the center pass that one could see it through a looking wand. These bases were in places with wider clearings. They had only 100 men each because their purpose was watching rather than fighting. They were to give updates on Dochmonian activity and warn the Lacinian army if an attack was in the works. The foremost camp sent messenger birds several times a day, both to Alva and to the other camps, letting them know of any Dochmonian activity, or, as it usually was, inactivity. Should Dochmon be mounting an attack, they would send birds to Alva and all the camps immediately, warning them, then mount their horses and ride to join the rest of the army as fast as possible. A real defense was possible only at the mouth of the pass. With 5 camps, Alva believed that if somehow Dochmon could sabotage a higher camp, the next one down could serve the same purpose. With a 24-hour watch, sabotaging a camp would be very difficult, but to do so with all 5 seemed impossible. Thus, there would be no surprise attacks. At the bottom of the pass, a strong defense was constantly ready. Once every 2 weeks, Alva and Bonson would personally inspect each camp. A ride through the entire pass took about 2 days, so it was nearly a day's ride to the camp furthest in. With the inspections, it would take about a day and a half. The 2 men would usually arrive at the second to highest camp late on the first night after riding since dawn. They would spend the night there, ride to the highest camp at dawn, and then ride back to the second lowest camp after inspection. They would ride home the next morning. Thus, these inspection journeys generally took just under 4 days. Alva wanted to personally make sure everything functioned as it should, and he brought Bonson with him so that they would have plenty of time for private talk. It was well known that Alva had plans for assaulting Dochmon, but what they were, or how such an assault could be possible, were well-kept secrets. Hellel enough successful spies in Hurin and even Dachmann to make Alva certain Dachmann had spies in Lassania. During their rides, Alva would explain his plans to Bonson. Though he did not know it, Bonson was Alva's chosen successor if anything should happen to him. He wanted him to know precisely what to do to win the war. Some objected that it was dangerous for two of Lassania's greatest generals to frequent such a dangerous place, but they always came back to the camp while it was still light and left long before dark. Besides, there were men watching every possible place of attack very carefully. It was well out of the range of arrows or catapults. Should Dachmann attack when Alva and Bonson were present, all would have plenty of time to gallop their horses down the pass with no chance of being caught. For their part, Alva and Bonson had no interest in being inactive directors of the army. They were soldiers first, and had both been in the grit of all the major battles, so visits to the front seemed a rather minor affair. Salia did not like it that her husband had to be gone 4 days out of 14. She wished Alva could take someone else, at least some of the time, but Bonson said Alva had his reasons. It was during one of their journeys that Salia discovered that she was with child. She had known many expectant mothers over the years and knew the signs well. Since her husband was gone, she went to tell Nera and Hope. Though Hope's pregnancy was incredibly healthy, she had put off helping train the archers and was engaging in less activity overall. Despite her talk of 9 months of freedom, Nera usually stayed with Hope while Alva was gone to make sure everything was okay. When Salia entered the tent, Hope knew immediately why she had come. She gave her a happy, knowing smile. Nera could see there was something that she did not catch and asked what was going on. "I'm going to have a child," Salia said. Hope rose, walked over to her, and put her hand on her belly. "She's wonderful," she said. "Well, I guess I know it's a girl now," Salia said with the slightest tone of annoyance in her voice. "Oh," Hope said, reddening. "Oops, I could be wrong." "You're never wrong," Salia said, laughing. "Don't worry about it. At least now I know what color clothes to knit. I hope Bonson will be happy with a girl." "I'm sure he wants a little girl just like you," Nera said. Salia did not tell Bonson that she knew the gender of their child, and swore Hope and Nera to secrecy. This was not for fear of him being disappointed, but because she wanted him to be surprised and rather enjoyed having this secret. Nera was right, though. He seemed as excited at the prospect of having a girl as he was about having a boy. Salia told him about the baby as soon as he and Alva returned. She, Hope, and Nera had been waiting for them. Bonson began to dance around with celebratory shouts. After some time he turned to Alva and shouted, "Alva, I'm going to have a little one." Alva smiled, but before he could speak, Salia cut him off. "Alva Dene, I don't care how great of a warrior you are. If you say, 'Nice work,' I will kill you." Alva shrugged, smiled, and said, "Good job." Then they all burst out laughing.